In 1868, in England, because of a washed-out road, the carriage of the Jostar family flew into a cliff. And it all happened in front of Dario Brando and his wife, who were passing nearby. Then, in this accident, a baby boy survived, whom his mother covered with her body. The body of his father, Gеorghe Joestăr, was lying on the street, and the body of the driver was also next to the carriage. And since Dario had a low social responsibility, he, having seen the carriage of the rich, without hesitation decided to get rich, and he began to collect valuable things. He also found a terrible mask nearby in a suitcase, which he threw aside as unnecessary. Then Dario removed the ring from the Lord, but he suddenly came to his senses, and when he saw him in front of him, the Lord thought that he had saved him, for which he immediately thanked him in advance, and he also asked about the well-being of his wife and child, to which Dario replied that the woman and the driver did not survive, but the boy was alive. Then he learned the name of his alleged savior and promised that he would never forget what he had done for him. But the cunning Dario was only happy about this, since the previously stolen ring remained with him. Meanwhile, the red liquid of the driver ran up to the stone mask, and it seemed to come to life. It's been 12 years. At the table, the already grown-up son of the Lord, Jonathan Jostar, aka JoJo for short, who is having fun with his beloved dog Donnie, is having dinner. Meanwhile, in the Brando family, over the years, Dario fell ill with an incurable disease, and therefore drank heavily. All this was watched by his son Dio, who was very annoyed by the behavior of his father, but Dio himself earned money with his brains by beating people. However, since he is still a child, it was not easy for him. When Dario felt that he would soon leave for another world, he told Dio to go to the Jostars at the address from the letter, as he wants his smart son Dio to become the richest man in this world. After that, Dario went to another world, and Dio cursed his father because he brought his mother to go to another world, and he considers him the worst father in the world. However, his words about the fact that Dio should become the richest sunk into his soul, and he is now going to use all the resources to achieve this goal, including the use of the resources of the Aristocrat Jostar, and he also decided to become the one who never loses. Meanwhile, JoJo learned manners, and he also tried to be a gentleman and protected Irina from bullies, who ended up with his handkerchief with his initials. And it is at this moment that the most incredible adventures of two young men, Jonathan and Dio, begin, whose fates were accidentally intertwined by a mysterious stone mask. In this connection, Dio epically arrives at the house of the Jostar family, where from the first seconds he is infuriated, in his opinion, by the spoiled jerk JoJo, who will have to inherit his father's fortune. However, Dio is not going to put up with it, and so he decides to break his spirit. And he begins to do this with a kick to his dog, making it all look as if he was frightened by the attack of the dog and defended himself. After that, oblivious George introduced Dio to everyone and explained that he was the son of a man who once saved his life, and therefore everyone should treat Dio in the same way as with his own son JoJo. As his father walked away to show Dio to the room, Dio immediately decided to show JoJo who would be number one here. In this regard, he attacked him and said that JoJo should not stand in his way, and he also said that then he kicked Donnie not because he was afraid, but because he hates dogs because of their nature. From that moment on, JoJo's life has changed dramatically, where now he was in the background in all manifestations, because Dio was as perfect as possible in everything, and even his father, comparing them, began to praise his skills. A couple of years go by at this pace. In a makeshift ring, JoJo proves to be the clear winner. However, Dio appears and attacks him with tricks from the crook's shelter, and also there he shot JoJo as a talker who does not know how to keep his mouth shut, on the basis of which everyone starts to turn away from him and insult him. As a result, JoJo had only Danny left of his friends. However, he accidentally crosses paths with Irina, who at the first meeting gives him grapes and his very initial handkerchief. They begin to communicate closely with her, then to touch each other's lips. But Dio found out about the fact that Irina is helping JoJo and decides to touch her lips himself so that she does not interfere with the implementation of his plan. JoJo learns about what happened from local hooligans and therefore, with burning eyes, gets home to destroy Dio. But he only using JoJo's emotional state defeats him. Because of what? Our main character understands that he cannot win, but he cannot give up either, because then he will live in the shadow of Dio all his life. Meanwhile, Dio was waiting for JoJo to break down, but it wasn't there, because his second wind turned on. And with the next attack, JoJo grabbed Dio by the head and delivered a powerful attack. He continues to feed Dio with powerful attacks. Even the red liquid hit the hanging mask and it started moving again. Suddenly, Dio took out a knife. But suddenly the father appeared, who stopped this battle and said that he would punish both guys later. However, there is still a strong blow to the spirit of JoJo. Dio caught his dog in a box and threw him into the oven, leaving only memories of Danny. 7 years pass, and the year 1888 comes, where Jack the Ripper was operating just at the same time. At the rugby match, where the already grown-up JoJo and Dio brought victory to their team. Dio quickly seeks to inform his father about this achievement, and JoJo at that moment thought that Dio was a full-fledged member of the Joestr family, but he still does not trust him. Even though 7 years have passed since those events, Dio was interviewed, where during this he silently explained that for all these 7 years he had been pretending to be a friend of JoJo. After that, the guys returned home, where it turned out that their father was very ill. He had chest pains from a common cold and had a bad cough. JoJo couldn't believe how a common cold could take his father down like that. Dio suggested that his father be treated at home and not go to the hospital, because they need a lot of money there. It also turned out that the father already knows about their victory from his friend, and he is proud of his sons, especially Dio. It also turned out that JoJo began to experiment with the mask, but he kept it all a secret, and he perceived the mask as a memory of his mother. He accidentally found in the library a letter sent by Dario to Dio 7 years ago, where it was written that he was ill and would most likely go to another world. He had exactly the same symptoms as his father now. In this connection, JoJo found Dio, who at that time replaced his medicines on the way to his father's room, and he began to read him a letter and decided to check the medicines. But Dio grabbed his hand and said that now JoJo is putting their friendship into question with his actions. JoJo offered to swear by his real father, and then he would believe him. Dio remembered that his real father was a poor loser, and therefore punched JoJo in the face. After that, JoJo realized that he was most likely to blame for the illnesses of his father and Father Dio. In this connection, he threw Dio to the first floor and said that he would check the drugs in the laboratory. Dio himself began to remember how his father beat him and mocked his mother, who left for another world from overwork. Then Dio decides to destroy JoJo for this using the mask from the box. Meanwhile, JoJo asked his father to take medicine only from trusted persons, and he himself went to London for 3 days, where for the first 2 days, having visited various laboratories, he could not find out anything about the substance that Dio gave his father. Therefore, he went to Ogre Street, one of the most criminal areas, since he knows that Dio lived in London, and most likely in this place he found this supposedly oriental poison. JoJo went on a quest alone, where he was attacked by Speedwagon and his accomplices. However, JoJo, with minor injuries, was able to defeat them. He also showed himself as a gentleman and saved the lives of the bandits, which immediately won the respect of Speedwagon. And when another 100 bandits arrived, now Speedwagon stood up for JoJo, and he also helped him find an oriental herbalist. Meanwhile, Dio met 2 old people on the street who tried to piss him off. Then he decided to test the mask, and it turns out that this is not just a mask, but it turns people into vampires that feed on red liquid and burn in the sun. And so Dio realized what power he had in his hands. However, when he returned home, JoJo was already waiting for him, who found the herbalist, gave his father an antidote, and realized what Dio was up to. But Dio, in response to this, only began to play with JoJo, just to play for time, and he lost his vigilance in order to destroy him later. But suddenly Speedwagon, who arrived here after JoJo, intervened in this conversation, and he warned him not to believe the words of Dio. After all, having lived all his life in the darkness of the slums, he learned to determine who is in front of him, a scoundrel or a good person. And he called Dio a real villain who was born that way. He also brought out from behind the screen the same Chinese from whom Dio bought poison, and he confirmed everything. However, the Chinese also unexpectedly added that Dio was born blessed with good luck. This is evidenced by his 3 moles on his ear, and therefore he is sure that Dio will not lose now. It also turned out that the whole conversation was heard from beginning to end by the father and the policeman, and Dio realized that this was the end. However, he still continued to cheat and use JoJo's attention. He asked him to personally handcuff him. However, at that moment, he took out both a knife and a mask. He attacked JoJo, but his father covered him with his body, and he put on a mask, and the transformation began. The police immediately started shooting at him, and as a result, he broke through the window and fell lifeless on the street, and JoJo's father had his vital organs hurt, and he did not have long, in connection with which he handed over to his son the ring that once belonged to him mother. Their farewell conversation was joined by the inspector, who told the story that when he was young, he was looking for a man who tried to sell an expensive ring, and it was the same Dario Brando, Dio's father. The inspector had heard that he had once saved Lord Jostar, and so he took this ring to him. But it turned out that the Lord decided to help the thief, and therefore confirmed that the ring was a gift for saving a life. After that, he again handed him the ring and told him to sell it, and forgetting about his crimes, began a normal life. Meanwhile, the father asked not to hold a grudge against Dio, and then went to another world. It turned out that Dio hadn't been destroyed at all. He turned into a vampire, and with the first blow he destroyed the inspector. Then Speedwagon attacked him in the head, but he continued on his way without any problems. He began showing JoJo his new abilities from the mask. He grabbed one of the policemen and sucked the liquid out of him, and with his body destroyed the remaining policeman and wounded Speedwagon. JoJo realized that Dio was no longer human, and although he was scared, he took a pike and decided to plant Dio on him. However, only his hand was impaled, in which he broke the pike and stuck its tip into JoJo's shoulder. After that, Dio decided to enjoy bullying JoJo. However, they unexpectedly, together with Speedwagon, doused him with kerosene, in connection with which a powerful fire was formed. JoJo threw his friend away so that he could survive, and with the help of his sword, he was able to jump out of the fire and climb onto the balcony, where he began to lure Dio to himself in order to save Speedwagon. He also began to climb onto the roof, at the same time watching his father's body burn down and saying goodbye to him with words. As a result, Speedwagon got out of the building, and JoJo and Dio began to fight. But realizing that the forces are unequal, JoJo decided not to let the chaos that Dio could bring into this world. He grabbed it and flew down into the fire. However, Dio threw him back and caught on the wall, and JoJo continued to fall down. Flying almost to the end of the building, JoJo used the tip of his spear to hook onto the wall and jump up, and he also used his belt to reach out to Dio. Then he attacked him in flight with a weapon with which he filled up his father, and after that he planted him on the guard of the Jostar mansion, the goddess of love. As a result, Dio burned down and turned into ashes, but JoJo himself managed to fly out into the street and stay alive. JoJo won the battle with Dio, but at the cost of everything he had. However, it turned out that Dio survived, and the Chinese helped him in this. In this connection, Dio found Jack the Ripper and took control of him, thereby turning him into a vampire, and also he began to restore his strength and take control of people more. Meanwhile, Speedwagon took JoJo to the hospital, where Irina took care of him. When he came to his senses 3 days later, love ignited between them. During their walk, they unexpectedly met Zeppeli, who knew their names and was glad that JoJo was able to survive the encounter with the power of the stone mask. After that, he abruptly jumped up to the injured JoJo and inserted his finger into him, from which he began to choke, and in parallel with this, magic began to happen. JoJo's bones began to recover. JoJo was at a loss as to who this mysterious wizard was. Then Zeppeli introduced himself and said that JoJo would not be able to defeat the stone mask with courage alone, and what is happening now was not done by him. It was the breath of JoJo himself, which healed him. He simply tapped his diaphragm with a finger to change his breathing. Later, already on the river, he decided to show how the energy of breath release works. He decided to show strength on the frog, through which he destroyed the stone with a blow without harming it. This is called Senda, and the energy is Jamin, which he passed through the frog to break the stone. He also revealed that Dio is actually alive, and the stone mask has not been destroyed. And now, if JoJo does not learn Haman, then death awaits him and the whole world. But JoJo decided not to involve Irina, who was trying to figure out what it was all about. Also, by touching the tree, he was able to unconsciously use the remnants of the energy that Zeppeli gave him, and he realized that JoJo had great potential. Over the next week, Zeppeli trained him for the courage to fight Dio, and there he explained why he was looking for this mask. Turns out it all started when he was young. His father was a famous archaeologist, and he decided to join his father's archaeological team, with which they traveled the whole world until they stumbled upon Indian ruins, where they found the very mask. When they returned home, someone put it on and destroyed all the members of the team. Only Zeppeli remained alive, who, having jumped into the water, tried to escape from the villain, who turned out to be his father turned into a vampire. However, as soon as the sun rose, it burned down and turned into ashes, and the mask remained on the ship, which went to surf the oceans. But Zeppeli knew that sooner or later this mask would be activated again, in connection with which he began to look for ways to resist her. So he came to Jayman. This energy is born from the flow of fluid in the body, which carries oxygen. Suddenly, Speedwagon appeared and reported that people began to disappear en masse in the city, and they saw someone similar to Dio there. In this connection, our brotherhood went to where JoJo will already be training in the field. They drove into a tunnel where their horses and coachmen were destroyed. This was done by the zombie Jack the Ripper, who was inside the horse. Zeppeli decided to take the hit, so he poured a glass of wine and attacked Jack without spilling a drop. Jack realized that he could not destroy the Zeppelis, and therefore began to run away. Then Zeppeli gave the task to JoJo. He must defeat the monster with a glass of wine without spilling a single drop. If he spills the wine, no matter the outcome, Zeppeli will stop teaching him. A fight began in the maze, where Jack was able to injure JoJo. However, he remembered Zeppeli's words about the north wind and the power of Jayman, and he smelled it in wine. Then he passed the energy through his body and the earth, and thus discovered Jack. JoJo managed to break the wall with one blow and destroy Jack the Ripper. After the fight, they went to the city, where they were robbed by a boy who was hypnotizing Dio. He lured them into a trap in the graveyard of the Knights, where Dio himself appeared after sunset. He began to call on zombies, and also announced that he was going to change the world order and turn all people into his zombies. Zeppeli realized that Dio is very strong, and therefore he himself will fight. However, during the Sun Ripple's attack, Dio was able to evaporate the moisture from his hand and freeze it. Then Zeppeli started attacking with his feet, and he managed to get away from Dio's attack. Dio realized that JoJo and Zeppeli were too weak for him, and therefore he summoned the Knights of Bruford and Tarkus, who served Queen Mary Stuart 300 years ago. Elizabeth I wanted to get the throne, and therefore treacherously destroyed the queen and deceived these knights, who left for another world with a feeling of malice and hatred. Therefore, now the knights swore to Dio that they would help destroy this rotten world. However, during the fight with JoJo, Bruford regained his humanity and recognized JoJo as a unique person, to whom he gifted his sword. Tarkus did not like this act and called Bruford a weakling. In a rage, he broke off a piece of earth with one blow, because of which the guys began to fly down the slope. However, Zeppeli and JoJo, with the help of a Jayman, assembled a magnetic airplane from the leaves, on which they all flew together. At that moment, Zeppeli remembered how he learned about the power of the Jayman. It was in the port where he met a doctor who healed people with this magic. He went to the mentor Dr. Tom Petty in Tibet, who told him that if he learned Jayman, then his fate would change. And it turns out Tom Petty told him about his fate. Meanwhile, Tarkus caught up with them and crashed their airplane, causing them to land in the fortress where the knights once held their brutal training. Tarkus flew into the wall and found a passage to the fortress, and the guys were preparing to meet the knight head-on on the street. However, they needed to hide the guy. JoJo decided to check out the fortress, but when he entered, Tarkus threw a chain around his neck, closing the door. And now he and JoJo will fight in a deadly duel, where Tarkus once defeated as many as 48 people. Since the door can only be opened from the inside, the guy Polka, who remembered how he suffered due to inaction and fear, he decided to save the person who should save the world, and therefore he climbed into the fortress. But inside he was overtaken by Tarkus, who almost attacked the guy, but JoJo arrived in time and saved him. JoJo heroically diverted Tarkus's attention, while Polka seized the moment and opened the door. Going inside, Zeppeli realized that the time of prophecy had come. The master looked into Zeppeli's future and saw that his end would take place in a closed room filled with the stench of former cruelty, when the child opened the gate to free the young lion, chained to the future. There, Zeppeli will receive terrible wounds and go to another world. Then Zeppeli immediately headed towards Tarkus, but the knight was able to attack him from above and below at the same time, and then bound him with chains and split him in half. He also injured JoJo's neck with the same chain. However, Zeppeli, with his last breath, poured all his life energy into JoJo, and therefore JoJo was completely healed and was able to lift Tarkus with a new strength with a chain. He broke the chain around his neck with his hands, and then he destroyed Tarkus himself, after which they went to the city, where they met Zeppeli's friends, who had come here because of his letter. They were Dyer, Straits, and teacher Tonpetty. They decided to spend the night at Poki's house, and it turned out that his sister had been kidnapped by Dio. She slapped him, and in response, Dio ordered the jellyfish to destroy her. However, JoJo and the team managed to save her in time. And there, JoJo could already control his blood flow, and even extract poison from it. They got to Dio, where Dare was the first to take revenge on Zeppeli. However, Dio completely froze him and shattered his body, but he still managed to hurt Dio's eye with a rose of Haman. While JoJo and Dio fight, the others decide to attack the other created zombies. During the fight, JoJo was able to cunningly injure Dio's hand, and he almost managed to cut him in half. However, Dio was able to freeze him at the last second, and he launched a vampire essence through his carotid artery. But since JoJo did not have his whole body frozen, he was able to use fire to unfreeze himself, and he was also able to extract poison from his body. To get out, Dio broke his sword. JoJo tried to attack him with a Haman, but Dio managed to freeze his hands in a second. JoJo then came up with a plan to use the ripple along with the fire, and managed to break through Dio's defenses, causing his body to begin to melt. He, exhausted, began to fall into the abyss, but at the same time, at the last moment, he was able to injure JoJo with a laser. Dio was destroyed and was already at the bottom. Well, JoJo himself collapsed to the ground from impotence. It turned out that Dio injured his head in flight so as not to disappear, and the same Chinese man grabbed his head. In this outcome of the battle, 73 residents of the city disappeared without a trace, and Speedwagon broke the stone mask. After all these events, JoJo married Irina. They decided to spend their honeymoon in America, where they went on a ship where a strange priest, Father Styx, boarded. Also on this ship was loaded a strange heavy box, which was transported by a strange Chinese. During dinner, JoJo saw a Chinese and realized that Dio was alive, and therefore he asked Irina to close in his cabin, and he himself began to pursue the Chinese. Meanwhile, the priest accidentally dropped the cross on that strange box in the hold. He decided to see what was inside, but was immediately destroyed. Because of the noise, a Chinese man and JoJo came running there. It turned out that the box contained the head of Dio, who wants to take over JoJo's body in order to enslave America. He wanted to hypnotize JoJo, but he closed his eyes. And then Dio fired a laser at his neck, and now he can't use the J-man because he can't breathe. Suddenly, Irina came there, who ran after her husband as she felt something was wrong. Dio then ordered Wang Chen to destroy JoJo. However, he used the last Haman technique and took control of it to block the steam engine with it. Meanwhile, the entire ship was filled with zombies that attacked ordinary people. A woman with a child fell into their hold, for whom she gave her life. Irina ran to JoJo, but he ordered her to grab the fallen child and try to survive. Dio ordered his subordinates to release the engine, but it was already too late. JoJo, with his last strength, covered Irina and the child with his body, and Dio released the tentacles from his head and wanted to capture his almost lifeless body. But that one of the last forces attacked him with iron and seized him. However, he did not have time to do anything, as there was an explosion and the ship was destroyed. Irina, on the other hand, was able to survive in an armored box that Dio made specifically for himself in order to escape from the ship. It also turned out that Irina was pregnant by JoJo and was rescued from the big ocean 2 days later. If you want to continue, then write about it in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, like and press the bell so as not to miss new videos. AniMap was with you. Bye everyone!